I bought this farmhouse for $330. The county tax lion auction was held on a Tuesday morning. A folding table, a county clerk, a laminated sheet of properties, and 11 people who had come to bid on things other people had lost. Hattie Drummond had been the only bidder on Lot 7. The clerk read the address, read the opening bid, looked up once, and knocked the gavel when no one else raised a hand. $330. The man beside her said not unkindly that the back taxes alone would cost more than the structure was worth. She thanked him and wrote the check. She was 69 years old and she had spent 34 years as a school librarian. She had learned in that work that the things most worth examining were consistently the things other people had decided weren't worth the trouble. She had driven out to walk the property before the auction. She had seen the barn. She had not yet seen what was inside it. She found the vault on her second day. She pushed the barn door open on its rusted track and stood in the interior while her eyes adjusted old timber, framing a century of use settled into the structure, the earthen floor packed to the hardness of stone. Standard farm construction throughout, except at the far end. Set directly into the fieldstone foundation wall integrated with it, framed into it the installation too precise to be anything other than deliberate and skilled a vault door. Commercial grade. The circular steel form of a serious locking mechanism, the kind manufactured for institutional use in the mid-20th century. The surface oxidized to a uniform gray-green, the construction intact beneath the weathering, the door untouched and solid. She crossed the barn floor and stood in front of it. At chest height, raised metal lettering oxidized to the same gray-green as the surrounding steel, but fully legible after 52 years of barn air and silence. $330 AH 1972. She read it once. She read it again. $330. The exact figure on the check she had written 3 days earlier at the county clerk's table. Stamped on this door in 1972, 52 years before she had ever set foot on this property, by someone whose initials were A.H. and who had known or had arranged or had calculated that this number would mean something to the person who eventually came. She stood in the barn for a long time. 34 years in a library had taught her one thing above all else: a number placed in a specific location by a careful person is never accidental. It is either a price, a date, a quantity, or it is something else entirely. A reference, a notation, a case number written on a door by someone who understood that doors, unlike paper, are very difficult to lose. Agnes Hollis had not lost this farm to bad luck or bad timing. Hattie did not yet know what Agnes Hollis had lost it to, but she knew with the particular certainty of someone who had spent 3 decades teaching students to read the thing behind the thing that $330 stamped on a vault door in 1972 was not a price tag. It was an accusation. She took out her notepad and wrote the number down and drew a box around it. Then she wrote beneath it, "Find the key. This vault does not open onto storage. It opens onto whatever A.H. needed 52 years to say." The auction room was a municipal meeting room on the second floor of the county building. Folding chairs arranged in 4 rows, a county clerk at a table at the front, a laminated sheet of properties taped to an easel beside her, 11 people in the chairs, some with notepads, some with phones, all with the particular focused attention of people who had come to acquire something specific and were waiting for the relevant lot to be read. Hattie Drummond was in the 3rd row with a notepad and a pen, and a sealed envelope containing a check she had prepared the previous evening. She had driven out to walk the property 2 days before the auction. That was the first thing she had learned in 34 years of running a school library. You did not make a decision about something you had not examined directly. Catalog descriptions were written by people with reasons to simplify. The actual item was always more complicated and more interesting than the description, and the complications were usually the point. The farmhouse had been photographed for the auction listing from the road. A single-image flat morning light, the structure presenting itself without apology. Most of the other bidders she gathered from the conversations around her had made their assessments from the photograph and the tax record. Hattie had made her assessment from the property itself, which was a different thing. The clerk read Lot 7. A farmhouse and outbuilding county road frontage, stone foundation construction vacant for 11 years, one outstanding tax lien. The outstanding debt that had triggered the lien sale was the opening bid, $330. The clerk looked up from the laminated sheet. Not one other hand went up. Hattie's did. The man to her left, the one who had been making notes on a legal pad since the auction began, looked at her with the expression of someone who had assessed a situation and felt a professional obligation to share the assessment. The back taxes, he said. The structural remediation. The carrying costs on a vacant rural property. He said it not unkindly. She thanked him genuinely and kept her hand up until the gavel came down. She was 69 years old, and she had spent 4 decades in the organized company of other people's knowledge, cataloging it, maintaining it, making it findable for people who needed it. She had been very good at this work, and she had found it genuinely satisfying for most of the time she had done it. But it had always been someone else's knowledge, someone else's collection, someone else's building with someone else's name on the deed. She wanted at 69 something that was entirely and uncomplicatedly her own. $330, written on a check, handed to a county clerk, property transferred, her own. She drove out that afternoon for the first real walk through. The farmhouse was 2 stories stone foundation, the exterior clapboard weathered but not failing. The structure had been maintained at some level, even through 11 years of vacancy, the roof sound, the foundation intact. She walked the ground floor slowly, the way she had always walked an unfamiliar library on the first day. Establish the geography before you begin to understand the collection. The kitchen first. A cast-iron range still connected to the flue, the kind of range installed in a working kitchen by someone who intended to use it seriously. The shelving along the kitchen walls was built-in, not purchased cabinetry, not standard dimensions, but custom construction. The joints fitted with a precision she noticed immediately because it was the same quality as the barn framing she had seen from the road. Whoever had built these shelves had built them with the same skill and the same intention as the structure around them. This was a house made by someone who knew how to make things. On the kitchen windowsill at the end of the shelf nearest the window, a small object. She almost missed it. The scale was modest, the wood darkened with age, the form simple enough that it read at first glance as part of the shelf. A carved wooden figure of a tree. Not decorative in the ornamental sense, there was no ornamentation, no surface detail beyond the form itself. The roots were deep and explicit, extending below the base of the carving in the manner of a cross-section diagram rather than a stylized image. The kind of object made by someone who thought carefully about roots as a structural reality rather than a metaphor. She turned it over. On the underside, in careful letters pressed into the wood with a small tool, A.H. She stood at the kitchen window for a moment, turning the carving in her hand. Signed. Objects that were signed had been made deliberately and kept deliberately, and the signing was a form of ownership, a maker's mark, a record of authorship. A librarian's instinct accumulated across decades of handling things that mattered. She put the carving in her coat pocket. It belonged somewhere, and until she knew where her pocket was the safest available location, she walked to the barn. The exterior stopped her before she opened the door. The construction was not what she expected from a working farm barn of this age. The framing was visible at the gable ends, and she stood back and looked at it, mortise and tenon joinery throughout the beam spans, precise, the structural logic of a building designed by someone who understood load distribution and had built accordingly. Not a general contractor's standard agricultural structure. This had been designed by someone who knew what they were doing and had done it with the intention that the result would last. She pulled the door open on its rusted track and went inside. The interior confirmed the exterior. The timber framing overhead was the work of the same hands and the same mind as the joinery she had seen from outside the spacing. Deliberate, the connections fitted the whole structure, carrying its own weight with the particular economy of good engineering. She walked the length of the barn, slowly looking up and then down, reading the building the way she read any unfamiliar space. At the far end, set into the north wall where the stone foundation met the earthen floor, she stopped. A vault door. Steel circular in form, the construction of a serious locking mechanism, not a repurposed farm safe, not a converted cabinet, but a commercial-grade unit of the kind she associated with small-town bank branches in the mid-20th century. The steel had oxidized to a uniform gray-green, the surface weathered evenly across decades of the same barn air. The circular door was approximately 3 feet in diameter, set into the fieldstone wall with a precision that told her immediately it had not been retrofitted. The stone around it had been built to accommodate it, the courses fitted to the circular frame with the same care as the timber joinery above her. The vault was original to the barn. Whoever had built this structure had built the vault into it. She circled it slowly. The combination wheel was a standard 3-digit mechanism, the numerals worn but legible. The lever handle was stiff with disuse, but intact, the mechanism showing no evidence of forced entry or attempted access. No external lock, only the combination. 52 years of barn air and silence, and the door had not been touched. She crouched at the lower right face of the door and looked at the surface closely. Raised metal lettering oxidized to the same gray-green as the surrounding steel pressed into the door face at some point in its history, and weathered since to the same uniform patina as everything around it. She took the sleeve of her coat and wiped the surface carefully the way she had always cleaned a label before reading it. The letters resolved beneath the cloth. $330 AH 1972. She stood up slowly. She took the wooden tree carving from her coat pocket and held it in her palm, turned it over. A H in careful letters on the underside. She looked at the vault door. A H in raised metal at the lower right face. She reached into her jacket and took out the folded auction receipt, unfolded it. The figure at the top of the county's accounting, $330. $330 in her hand, on the vault. The same number 52 years apart, connected by 2 initials she did not yet have a name for. She stood in the barn for a long time without moving. If you want to know who AH was and why that number is on that vault, stay with me. She was at the county records office when it opened at 8:30. Ruth Pemberton was already at her desk. The county historian had the particular quality of presence that belonged to people who arrived early, not from obligation, but from the genuine preference for being in the place where their work was before the day's interruptions began. She was 60 years old, precise, in the way of someone who had spent her career distinguishing between what the record said and what people remembered it saying. And she looked up when Hattie came through the door with the auction receipt and a notepad, and the expression of someone who had spent the previous evening with a question she had not been able to set down. Hattie asked for 2 things: the complete ownership history of the Hollis farm parcel, and the original documentation for the $330 tax lien that had forced the 1972 auction. Ruth pulled the ownership file first. The chain of title ran back to 1939, the year Agnes R. Hollis had taken sole proprietorship of the farm, the deed recording a single owner the property maintained, under that ownership for 33 years of continuous unbroken tenure. From 1939 to 1972, the Hollis farm had belonged to one person. Then the 1972 auction, and after it, a different kind of history. 6 owners in 52 years, none staying more than a few years, the property cycling through hands with the particular restlessness of a place that had lost whatever had held it in one place. None of them had registered any modification to the barn structure. None of them had filed any document relating to the vault. Hattie noted this and moved on. The 1972 lien documentation was in a separate folder, the county's record of the tax authority action that had triggered the auction. Ruth set it on the table, and Hattie read through it methodically, the way she had always read unfamiliar documents from the first line to the last without skipping ahead. The lien had been assessed for unpaid property taxes across fiscal years 1969, 1970, and 1971. 3 years of accumulated liability, the county's records showing no payment received for any quarter across those 3 years. Total outstanding $330. The assessment had been certified, signed, stamped, and submitted to the county clerk's office for enforcement proceedings by the county tax assessor. She read the assessor's name, Vernon Hollis. She looked at the name for a moment. Then she looked at the farm's ownership records still open on the table beside the lien documentation. Agnes R. Hollis, Vernon Hollis, the same surname, the same farm. Ruth had been watching her read. He was the county tax assessor, Hattie said. It was not quite a question. For 11 years, Ruth said, 1965 to 1976. And he certified a lien against a woman with his own family name. Ruth nodded once. Agnes Hollis was Thomas Hollis's wife. Thomas died in 1969. Vernon was Thomas's younger brother. She paused. Agnes had been alone on the farm for 3 years before the lien was filed. The timeline assembled itself cleanly. Thomas Hollis had died in 1969, the first year of the claimed tax liability. Agnes had been managing the farm alone through 1970 and 1971, the remaining 2 years of the period Vernon had declared unpaid. And in November 1972, 3 years after her husband's death, the lien had been certified, and the auction had been scheduled, and she had lost the farm. Hattie set the lien documentation aside and asked for the underlying tax payment records for 1969 through 1971. Ruth was already pulling them. She set the folder on the table without comment and stepped back in the manner of someone who had read ahead and was giving the other person space to arrive at the same place without being directed. Hattie opened the folder. 3 years of quarterly payment records, the county's own receipts, the standard stamped forms of the tax authority's payment processing system, each one recording a payment received, a period covered, an amount acknowledged. Every quarter, every year, every payment. Stamped in the confirmation field of each receipt and the county tax authority's official stamp, paid in full. She laid the payment receipts on the table in chronological order, 12 receipts, 3 years, 4 quarters each, the stamp consistent throughout. Then she placed Vernon's certified lien assessment beside them. The same fiscal years, the same quarterly periods, the same dollar amounts. One set of documents said Agnes Hollis had paid every quarter on time and in full across all 3 years of the claimed liability. The other set said she hadn't paid anything. Both sets were in the county's own records. Both had been sitting in the same archive for 52 years. Hattie looked at the 2 sets of documents side by side on the table. Ruth had moved to a different drawer and was pulling a second file, Vernon Hollis's county employment record. She explained which had been archived with the personnel records of the county clerk's department at the time of the office's reorganization in 1988. She set it open on the table. Hattie read through the employment history. Vernon Hollis had been appointed county tax assessor in 1965 and had held the position through 1976. In December 1972, 1 month after Agnes's farm was auctioned, he had been promoted to deputy county clerk, the administrative position that oversaw land transfer records and deed filings. The position that would have given him direct oversight of every property transaction in the county. She noted the December 1972 promotion date in her notepad and drew a line to the November 1972 auction date above it. Ruth set one more folder on the table, the auction buyer's record. The Hollis farm parcel had been purchased at the November 1972 auction by a county holding company. She read the incorporation date, October 1972, 1 month before the auction. The company had been dissolved in January 1974. In the 14 months between incorporation and dissolution, the company had completed one transaction. January 1973. The sale of timber rights to 200 acres of forested land adjacent to the Hollis farm parcel. Buyer, a regional lumber consortium. The sale documentation was in the folder, the figures stated plainly on the transfer agreement. Sale price $48,000. Hattie looked at the figure. $48,000. Extracted from land taken for $330,000. The timber rights sold 2 months after the auction to a lumber consortium that had presumably been waiting for the parcel to clear. The holding company incorporated 1 month before the auction dissolved, 1 month after the timber rights transaction was completed, its single purpose accomplished. Ruth laid the documents in a sequence across the table, not editorially, not with commentary, simply in chronological order. Tax Lion certified November 1972. Auction completed November 1972. Vernon Hollis promoted to Deputy County Clerk December 1972. Timber rights sold to Lumber Consortium January 1973. Holding company dissolved January 1974. The sequence ran in one direction and it ran there cleanly. Ruth picked up Vernon's certified lien assessment and held it alongside the stack of paid in full receipts, the same fiscal years, the same quarterly periods, the same amounts, one document declaring the payments received and one document declaring they had never been made. "Agnes Hollis paid every one of these," Ruth said. Her voice was even the tone of a historian reading a record, rather than delivering a verdict, but even was doing a great deal of work. "Every quarter, on time, for every year of the claimed liability." She set the documents flat on the table, and the man who told the county she hadn't was the man who stood to benefit most directly from her losing the farm. Hattie looked at the paid in full stamps and at Vernon's signature on the lien certification and at the $48,000 figure on the timber rights transfer, and did not say anything for a moment. She wrote two figures in her notepad, $330. $48,000. Then she drew a line between them. She returned to the barn in the afternoon with a lantern, a measuring tape, and her notepad. She was not going to open the vault today. She had made this decision on the drive back from the county records office in the deliberate way she made decisions that required resisting the pull toward the next thing before the current thing was fully understood. A librarian's discipline: you did not skip to the end of the record before you had read what came before it. The vault was the end of something. She needed to understand what she was standing inside before she opened it. She started with the structure. She measured the beam spans from the interior working along each wall, recording the figures in her notepad, cross-referencing them against the span tables she had looked up on her phone the previous evening. The numbers were consistent throughout. The spans were precise, calculated for the loads. They carried the margin of safety built into the dimensions rather than achieved through excess material. Efficient structural design. Not the rule of thumb of a practical farmer building for function, but the considered calculation of someone who had worked out the engineering. She examined the joinery at the corner posts, mortise and tenon throughout the joints cut with accuracy that had maintained the building's plumb across 80 years of seasonal movement. She had read enough about traditional timber construction to know what good joinery looked like and what it required: the right tools, the right sequence, the patience to cut to the line rather than to approximate it. Whoever had made these joints had known what they were doing and had done it without shortcuts. She looked up. The center ridge beam ran the full length of the barn at the highest point of the structure, the spine of the roof system, the beam that everything else connected to. It was old oak, the surface darkened with decades of barn air, the grain close and dense. She positioned the lantern at the angle required to read the surface and looked along the length of it. At the center point of the ridge beam, the highest point of the barn skeleton, invisible from the floor, without a lantern held specifically to illuminate it, a carved inscription. H 1941. She stood on the second rung of the wooden ladder she had found against the north wall and held the lantern close and read it twice. Agnes had built this barn, not commissioned it, not overseen it, built it with her own hands in 1941, and had marked the highest beam the way a craftsperson marks their work. Not for display. For the record, a H at the peak of the structure where no one would see it unless they were looking. She pulled up the county building permit records on her phone. Ruth had given her research access to the digitized archive that morning. She searched the Hollis Farm parcel for 1941. 2 permits. Barn construction 1941 applicant listed as A.R. Hollis. Contractor of record none. Architect of record none. Self-build, the county's notation confirmed with the standard inspection sign-offs at foundation frame and completion. Agnes had applied for the permit herself and had built the structure herself and had passed the county's inspections at every stage. The second permit also, 1941, same applicant, vault installation, commercial grade, stone foundation integration. The permit described the unit, the installation method, the foundation modification required. Applicant A.R. Hollis. Contractor none listed. The vault had been installed the same year Agnes built the barn. Not as an afterthought, not in response to a crisis that had not yet occurred. She had designed the vault into the barn. From the beginning had planned it at the same time she planned the beam spans and the joinery, and the foundation work had integrated it into the stone wall as part of the original construction sequence. In 1941, Agnes Hollis had built a barn with a commercial vault in its foundation wall 31 years before she would need it. Hattie stood in the barn and looked at the vault door and thought about what it meant to build something that far ahead of the moment when it would be required. She moved along the interior wall, the lantern held low, reading the structure as she walked. Halfway along the east wall, behind a wooden partition that had partially collapsed with age, the planks rotted through at the base. The upper section still standing, leaning slightly inward, she found the cabinet. Built into the barn's framing, flush with the wall, the front face of the cabinet constructed from the same oak as the rest of the interior millwork. Long and shallow, perhaps 6 feet wide and 18 inches deep, the proportions of a storage unit designed for oversized flat documents. She had seen this design before in the county records office's older storage rooms, in the map rooms of the libraries she had worked in. Drafting cabinets used this profile. So did survey offices. So did anyone who needed to store rolled or flat materials without folding them. The locks were simple brass pin tumbler mechanisms, the kind standard to furniture of the period. They had not functioned in decades, the brass corroded, the pins seized. She worked the first one with the letter opener she had brought in her bag, applying lateral pressure until the mechanism yielded the way old locks yield when the material that holds them has softened with age. The second lock opened with less resistance. The cabinet front swung out. Inside rolled paper maps standing upright in the storage slots. 30 of them, she counted, each one rolled and tied with a length of cord that had dried to the consistency of old rope but held. She lifted the nearest roll and untied it and unrolled it carefully on the barn floor. A timber survey map. Hand-drawn, the scale noted in the lower right corner the area covered, identified by a grid reference in the upper left. She read it slowly. Every tree over 12 inches in diameter plotted in its approximate location, each one notated with species estimated age and diameter measurement. The creek running through the survey area named and its course traced with the accuracy of someone who had walked it repeatedly in different seasons. The ridgeline contoured. The access roads marked with condition notes and seasonal passability, this road impassable after October, this one reliable year-round, this one subject to flooding at the lower crossing. She unrolled the next map. Adjacent area, same level of detail, the same precise hand throughout. The next, the same. She worked through 5 of the 30 rolls, each one confirming the same thing, a systematic survey of forested land, conducted over time by a single hand with the rigor of professional survey work and no institutional support. She checked the dates. 1945, 1947, 1949, 1952, 1955. She pulled rolls from different positions in the cabinet and checked the dates on each. 1958, 1963, 1967, 1970. Agnes had been surveying this land continuously from 1945 to 1972. 27 years of fieldwork, recorded in 30 maps, stored in a cabinet she had built into a barn she had constructed herself in 1941, 4 years before the first survey date. She had been planning this for a very long time. The final map was at the back of the cabinet, standing separately from the others, tied with a different cord, newer or better preserved. She untied it and unrolled it on the barn floor beside the others. The same survey area, the complete 200 acres drawn with the accumulated precision of 27 years of fieldwork. And around the entire perimeter of the survey area, drawn in red ink, a border clean, deliberate, the kind of border that meant enclosure containment. This is the thing, and these are its edges. At the bottom of the map below the red border, a single notation in Agnes's hand. Recorded and sealed for the record. A.H., November 1972. The same month as the vault stamp, the same initials. the last thing Agnes had made before she left a complete survey of 200 acres of forest land, bordered in red, noted as recorded and sealed, signed and dated in the month Vernon's auction had taken her farm. Vernon had sold the timber rights to these 200 acres 4 months after the auction. Agnes had spent 27 years mapping every tree. Hattie stood in front of the vault door with the final survey map in one hand and the wooden tree carving in the other, and looked at the combination wheel. 3 digits, the combination lock of a vault installed in 1941 by a woman who had stamped $330 on the door in 1972. 3, 0. She set the survey map and the carving on the barn floor and reached for the combination wheel with both hands. She turned it to the first number, the second, the third. The mechanism clicked. A single clean sound in the quiet of the barn, the sound of a lock releasing that had been set 52 years ago by a woman who had known, when she set it, exactly what combination a careful stranger would try first. The wheel turned freely in her hands. The vault door swung open. The air that came out was dry and faintly cedar-scented, the particular dryness of a sealed space that had been protected from the outside world completely. The cedar note of a room, lined with the wood that preserved what was stored in it. The smell of a room that had been holding its breath since November 1972. 52 years! She stood at the open vault door and breathed the air Agnes had sealed inside it, and did not move for a long moment. The vault was cedar-lined throughout. Hattie stood in the open doorway and held the lantern into the space before she stepped inside, the way she had always held a light into an unfamiliar room before entering, establishing the geography, first understanding the dimensions, letting the space present itself. The interior was approximately 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep, the walls lined with cedar planking fitted to the stone, with the same precision as everything else Agnes had built. The cedar had done its work across 52 years. The air was bone dry, the preservation complete, the space holding its sealed condition exactly as Agnes had engineered it. She stepped inside. The single shelf along the back wall held one object, a wooden tray, flat and shallow. The dimensions of a serving tray, but the construction of something made for a specific purpose, fitted precisely to the shelf width. On the tray, 4 packages, each wrapped in oilcloth and tied with linen cord. The oilcloth cut to size, and the cord tied with the same even tension on each package, the work of someone who had prepared these with care and with time, not in haste. On the outside of each package in Agnes's hand, a number. 1, 2, 3, 4. She had numbered them. She had intended them to be read in sequence, and she had marked the sequence on the outside, so that whoever found them would know the order before they opened the first one. A librarian's recognition, immediate and certain, this was an organized collection prepared by someone who understood that the order in which information was received shaped the understanding of it. Hattie carried the tray to the barn floor where the lantern light was better and sat down. She opened package 1. The oilcloth fell away from a document, a single-page carbon copy paper, the kind used for official county forms in the mid-20th century when carbon copies were the standard method of record duplication. She recognized the form immediately from her work at the records office that morning, a county tax assessment, the standard printed format. The fields completed in a typescript she recognized as the county tax authority's standard issue. Vernon Hollis's signature was at the bottom, certified and stamped. But the document she was holding was not the same as the copy she had seen in the county records office that morning. This one had been annotated. Every line, every figure, every claimed liability had been addressed in pencil. Agnes's pencil, the same precise hand as the survey map notations and the permit applications and the carved inscription on the ridge beam. Beside each figure, a cross-reference, a payment receipt number, a county record number, a date. The annotation was systematic and complete, every claimed liability paired with the evidence of its payment, every figure in Vernon's assessment matched to the documentation that proved the figure was fabricated. At the bottom of the page below Vernon's signature, Agnes had written in the same careful pencil, "Every figure on this document is fabricated. VH created this liability against taxes I had paid in full. My payment records are attached. The county record numbers are beside each entry. Anyone who checks will find the same thing I found. Hattie read it twice. Not angry, not desperate. Precise, the notation of someone who had spent 30 years learning to document things accurately and had applied that skill to the most important document she would ever produce. Anyone who checks will find the same thing I found. She had not written, "I believe this is false," or "I think something is wrong." She had written, "Check the record numbers. The record will confirm it." She set the annotated assessment on the barn floor and opened package 2. A cedar box, small and fitted, she understood as she lifted it, that the wooden tray had been built around this box, the tray's dimensions calculated to hold it exactly. Inside the box, 36 receipts organized in chronological order, each one in its own paper envelope labeled with the quarter and year it covered. Quarterly tax payments 1969 through 1971. Each receipt bore the county tax clerk's stamp and the clerk's initials. Each receipt was stamped "Paid in full." She spread them on the barn floor beside the annotated assessment. 36 months of payment receipts organized by Agnes into the cedar box, fitted into the tray sealed in the vault in November 1972. She had known when she put them here that they were the foundation of everything else, that without them the annotation on the assessment was an argument, and with them it was proof. Package 3, a property deed. She unfolded it carefully, the paper firm and dry from 52 years of cedar-preserved storage. The form was different from the standard agricultural property deed she had seen on the Hollis farm transfer records, a different county filing category, the header reading mineral rights registration rather than agricultural property deed. She read the property description, an 8-acre parcel at the northern edge of the farm, the boundary coordinates given in the precise language of a survey filed by someone who knew how to survey land. The registered owner, Agnes R. Hollis. The registration date, 1948, 24 years before the lien, 24 years before Vernon had gone looking through the agricultural property tax records to construct the liability that would take the farm. He had looked in the agricultural records because that was where farm properties lived. He had not looked in the mineral rights registry. The 8-acre parcel Agnes had registered there in 1948 had never appeared in any agricultural tax record, had never generated a lien, had never been part of the auction, had never been transferred to the holding company, had never been included in the timber rights sale to the lumber consortium. The deed was still in Agnes's name. It had been in Agnes's name for 76 years, sitting in a county registry that Vernon had not thought to check, the waiting in a vault. He had not thought to open on a property he had sold for $330 and profited from by $48,000. Hattie sat with the deed in her hands and thought about the 8-acre parcel at the northern edge of the farm. Agnes had surveyed it. She had seen it in the maps, one of the 30 rolls in the barn cabinet, the northernmost section of the survey area, the old-growth timber stand she had mapped with the same precision as every other acre. An old-growth stand she had registered under mineral rights in 1948, which was not the standard filing for forest land, which was exactly why Vernon had never found it. She had been protecting it since 1948. She had known 24 years before the lien that it needed to be protected in a way that a county tax assessor wouldn't think to examine. She opened package 4. Inside the oilcloth, a wooden panel, hand-carved, fitted precisely to the back wall of the vault. She understood from its dimensions that Agnes had measured the vault interior and had made this panel to fill the back wall, exactly had placed it there, and had known it would be found by whoever opened the door. The carving was in the same clean lettering as the stamp on the vault exterior, the same hand that had annotated the assessment and signed the survey maps and marked the ridge beam. He took the trees. He missed the ground beneath them. A H, November 14th, 1972. She read it once. She set it on the barn floor and looked at the 4 items arranged before her, the annotated assessment, the 36 payment receipts in their cedar box, the mineral rights deed, and the carved panel, and let the account they told assemble itself without rushing it. Vernon had taken 200 acres of forest land that had been surveyed and documented and legally registered by the woman he had dispossessed. He had sold the timber rights for $48,000. He had built a career on the administrative power the transaction had enabled, the December 1972 promotion, the deputy county clerk position that oversaw the very land transfer records his fraud had required. And he had missed 8 acres. 8 acres that Agnes had registered under a different category in a different registry in 1948 because she had understood 24 years in advance that the protection needed to be where the threat wouldn't think to look. He took the trees. He missed the ground beneath them. Hattie sat on the barn floor with a lantern burning beside her and the smell of cedar still present in the cold air around her, and looked at the carved panel for a long time. Then she picked it up. She turned it over. On the reverse, the side Agnes had pressed against the vault wall, the side that had faced inward for 52 years, a second carving. Smaller, the letters cut with the same care as everything else Agnes had made. A name, an address in the county, and below the address in letters smaller still. He was there, he knows. I left this for him to decide. Gareth Hollis. Agnes stamped the price of the crime on the vault door and trusted a stranger to find it 52 years later. Have you ever seen patience used as precisely as this? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. She drove to the address the following morning. The house was on a residential street in the nearest town, a modest 2-story, the kind built in the post-war years for families who wanted something permanent and practical, the garden maintained with the quiet attention of someone who had lived there long enough to know every corner of it. A maple at the front, old enough to have grown well past the roofline, a porch with 2 chairs and a small table. A man in his 70s was sitting in one of the chairs with a cup of coffee when she pulled up. He saw her car stop at the curb. He set the cup down on the table with the deliberate care of someone putting something aside to attend to something more important. He stood. He looked at her coming up the front walk with the expression of someone reading information from a distance, not from her face exactly, but from the combination of her face and the way she was walking and what she was carrying. He did not go inside. He did not say good morning or introduce himself or perform any of the ordinary social mechanics of a stranger arriving at a door. He waited until she reached the porch steps, and then he said quietly, "You found the barn!" Not a question, a recognition. Hattie stopped at the base of the porch steps. "Yes," she said. He nodded once slowly in the manner of a man receiving confirmation of something he had been expecting for a very long time. Then he opened the front door and held it for her and said, "Come in. I'll make more coffee." His name was Gareth Hollis, and he was 74 years old, and the first thing she noticed about his house was that it was the house of a man who had been living carefully, not austerely, not without comfort, but with the particular economy of someone who had reduced his environment to what was necessary and had maintained it well. A reading chair, a bookcase, a kitchen table with 2 chairs. On the mantelpiece, a metal box, the kind used for personal correspondence or important documents. It was sitting in the center of the mantelpiece with the quality of an object that had been placed there recently and deliberately not stored, positioned. He poured coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table. "I was 22 years old in 1972, he said. He did not begin with pleasantries or with the ordinary social navigation of people who do not know each other well. He began where the story began, in the flat, measured voice of a man delivering something he had rehearsed in private across many years and was finally permitted to say aloud. I was living at home, working in my father's hardware store. My mother had died the year before, and my father, Vernon, was managing the county tax assessor's office and the store, and his own grief, not always in that order. He held his coffee cup in both hands without drinking from it. I was in the kitchen the night he wrote the assessment, late after supper after I'd gone upstairs. I came back down for something, and he was at the kitchen table with the county forms and a carbon sheet, and he was working very carefully, slowly, the way you work when you need something to look official. He paused. I didn't fully understand what I was watching. I was 22, and he was my father, and I thought it was routine county work. I went back upstairs. Outside, a car passed on the residential street. The maple in the front garden moved slightly in the morning air. Agnes came to the door 3 days after he served her the notice, Gareth said. I was in the hallway. I saw her come up the walk. She had a folder, a manila folder, thick, the kind that holds organized documents. She had it under her arm, and she was walking the way she always walked, which was directly and without rushing. She knocked. My father answered. He stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. She held out the folder. She said, "Every payment I've made is receipted in here with the county record number beside each one." She said it calmly, the way you'd say it if you'd had the folder organized before you even received the notice, because you'd known what was coming and you'd prepared. She knew the moment she received the notice that it was fabricated. She came to his door with the proof in her hands. He looked at the table. And my father shut the door. He stepped back and shut the door without reading a single page. Hattie did not say anything. The auction was 3 weeks later. I didn't go. I couldn't. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. I went to the farm the week after. Agnes was still there finishing her final clearing. I found her in the barn, not distressed, not crying, just completing a job. The way she did everything, she had a lantern and she was working through the last items along the wall, and when she saw me, she stopped and she looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "Gareth, the barn is locked. Tell your father to leave the barn alone. It's mine, and it'll keep being mine." He paused. I thought she meant the structure, the wood and the stone. I thought she meant she'd built it, and it was hers in that sense, the way a person says a thing they've made belongs to them, regardless of who holds the deed. I didn't understand what she actually meant until much later. He rose from the table and crossed to the mantelpiece and took the metal box down. He carried it back to the table and opened it. Inside a single envelope, the paper slightly yellowed with age, the seal broken long ago, and the flap tucked closed. He took the letter out and set it on the table between them. She sent this in 1974, 2 years after the auction. Hattie unfolded it carefully. One page, Agnes's precise hand threw out the same script as the vault annotations and the survey map notations and the carved panel. "Gareth, you are not your father's choices. I want you to know that the vault is secure and that everything inside it is in order. I believe you will do the right thing when the time comes. That is why your name is where it is. I do not need you to act now. I only need you to be present when the right person arrives. You will know them by the question they ask first. Agnes." She read it once, then read it again. "You will know them by the question they ask first." "I went to a lawyer in 1985, Gareth said. 13 years after the auction. I brought the letter and I explained what I had witnessed. The lawyer told me the statute of limitations had long since passed for any actionable claim against my father, who had been dead for 10 years by then." He paused. He said there was nothing to be done legally. He said I should consider that the matter was concluded. He looked at his hands on the table. My father had a large funeral. This would have been 1995. Half the county came. Former colleagues, people from the hardware store, people whose properties he'd assessed for 20 years. They said he was a good man and a dedicated public servant, and the county was fortunate to have had him. He stopped. I stood at the back of the church and I thought about Agnes Hollis coming up that front walk with her folder under her arm. The kitchen was quiet for a long moment. "She wrote that I'd know the right person by the first question they asked," he said. "Most people, if they'd come knowing what was in the vault, they'd ask me what else I knew, what other evidence there was, what could be done about the timber rights, the auction, the money." He looked at her. "You didn't ask any of those things." "What did I ask?" Hattie said. "You asked if I was there." He looked at the window. That was Agnes's question, the one she thought the right person would ask first. Not what happened, whether I saw it. A long silence. "Then, what do you need from me?" Hattie reached into her bag and set the mineral rights deed on the table between them. "Agnes left the deed to a piece of land your father never found," she said. 8 acres at the northern edge of the farm. It's still in her name. The lien never touched it because it was registered under mineral rights and he never looked in that registry. It has been in Agnes's name for 76 years and it is still legally hers." She paused. "I'd like to make sure it goes where she would have wanted it to go." Gareth looked at the deed. He read it slowly, the way a man reads something he has been waiting to see, taking each line in fully, not skimming. His finger moved along the parcel description. The boundary coordinates the northern boundary where the old growth stand began. Margaret's Run, he said quietly. I'm sorry. The creek on the northern boundary. He looked at the survey map she had brought with her, the final map from the barn cabinet, the one with the red border. His finger found the creek line running through the northern section. She named it Margaret's Run on the survey. Margaret was her mother. He looked up. She surveyed those 8 acres the first summer after her mother died, 1945. She said it was how she remembered her, by mapping the land her mother had loved. Hattie looked at the 1945 date on the first survey roll. She knew about the 8 acres, on Gareth said. Not quite a statement. The particular quality of understanding arriving. She surveyed every inch of it herself. She registered it separately under mineral rights in 1948, so your father would never find it in the agricultural records. She protected it for 24 years before he ever gave her a reason to. Hattie looked at the deed. She called it the ground beneath the trees. Gareth looked at the deed on the table between them. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he covered his face with both hands and stayed that way. They walked the parcel on a clear November morning. Ruth had driven out from the county office and met Hattie at the farm gate at 8 o'clock, and they had crossed the fields together in the particular quiet of a November morning that had decided on clarity rather than warmth. The sky hard blue overhead, the frost still present in the shadowed sections of the grass, the air carrying the specific quality of a season that had finished its transition and arrived at what it intended to be. The 8-acre parcel was at the northern edge of the farm, where the agricultural fields gave way to the tree line. Hattie had walked this boundary on her first day and had noted the change in the tree character, without fully registering its significance. The trees here were different from the regrowth timber that covered the surrounding hills. The regrowth that had come in after the Lumber Consortium's 1973 harvest had cleared the old growth from the 200 acres Vernon had sold. That regrowth was now 50 years old and showed at the trees uniform in age and diameter, the spacing characteristic of forest, recovering from clear-cutting the canopy, still developing toward the density it would eventually achieve. The 8 acres were different. The trees here were older than the surrounding forest by a margin that was immediately visible once you were standing among them. The trunks were larger in diameter, the bark more furrowed the canopy overhead, denser and higher. The light on the forest floor filtered through multiple layers of established growth rather than the thin canopy of recovering timber. These trees had been old when the surrounding forest was cleared in 1973, and they had had 80 additional years since. They had the particular quality of old-growth timber that had never been cut, not merely mature, but continuous, the ecology of a stand that had been developing without interruption for longer than anyone currently living could fully account for. Ruth was looking at her tablet as they walked the boundary. She had requested the county legal determination before the walk, the specific question of what the unclaimed mineral parcel's legal status meant and what could be done with it. She read the determination aloud as they moved through the trees, her voice steady and professional, the language of county legal findings delivered in the manner of someone translating from one register to another. The 8-acre mineral parcel had never been transferred during the 1972 lien proceedings because it had never appeared in the agricultural tax records that had formed the basis of Vernon's fabricated assessment. It had not been included in the Lumber Consortium's timber rights purchase because the consortium's survey had been drawn from Vernon's county records, which contained no reference to a mineral rights parcel in a separate registry. The parcel had passed to Agnes's estate on her death in 1977, 5 years after the auction. The estate had been administered and formally closed, but the mineral parcel filed in a different county registry under a different category had never been flagged by the estate administrator who had worked from the agricultural property records and had not cross-referenced the mineral rights registry. For 47 years, the parcel had sat in legal limbo, still registered to Agnes R. Hollis, never transferred, never claimed, never administered, waiting in a county registry that no one had thought to check because no one had known it was there, for the same reason Vernon had never found it, for the same reason it had survived, the lien and the auction and the timber sale and the estate administration. Agnes had filed it where it would not be found by people who were not looking for it. The county legal determination, because the parcel had never been transferred and the estate had never been fully administered with respect to it, it qualified as an unclaimed estate asset. It could be petitioned to a public land trust with county court approval, a process that would require documentation of the original registration, the chain of non-transfer, and a petition from an interested party with standing to bring the matter before the court. Ruth looked up from the tablet. "The documentation is in the vault," Hattie said. "All of it," Ruth confirmed. "The original deed, the registration records, Agnes's survey maps of the parcel. Everything required for the petition is already organized and preserved." She paused. She prepared this. She prepared the petition materials 52 years before anyone would file them. They walked deeper into the stand. Hattie had read Agnes's 1945 survey entry for this parcel the previous evening, the first survey Agnes had conducted, the one dated from the summer after her mother's death. The notation in Agnes's precise hand was brief and final, the language of someone who had made a decision and was recording it as settled fact rather than proposal. Northeast parcel original stand, not for commercial rotation, register separately. She had been 37 years old. She had walked into this stand for the first time, or perhaps not the first time, perhaps she had walked it all her life, but the first time with the eye of a surveyor and the intent of a protector. And she had looked at these trees and had understood what they were and what they required. Not management, not rotation, separation from the systems that would otherwise subject them to commercial calculation. Register separately. 3 words that had taken 24 years to fully implement, from the 1945 survey notation to the 1948 mineral rights registration, and that had then protected these 8 acres through everything that followed the death of Thomas in 1969, Vernon's fabricated assessment in 1972, the auction, the timber sale, the estate administration. Because Agnes had looked at a stand of old-growth trees in 1945 and had understood precisely what she was looking at and precisely what it needed. Ruth stopped walking and looked up at the canopy. She was doing exactly what she always did, she said quietly. The county historian's voice carried the particular quality of someone saying something they had been understanding gradually and had now understood completely. Surveying, documenting, planning for contingencies she hoped would never come. She looked at the nearest trunk, the diameter well beyond what any commercial timber operation would have left standing in 1973. She protected this by knowing how the system worked and building around its weak points. The Mineral Rights Registry was a weak point, a category Vernon would never think to check, because the farm was agricultural property. She found the gap, and she put the most important thing she had inside it. Hattie was moving slowly through the stand, reading the ground the way Agnes had taught her to read things, through movement, through attention, through letting the space present itself before imposing a conclusion on it. At approximately the center of the stand, where the oldest trees formed a loose circle around a small clearing, the ground cover was thick with decades of accumulated leaf matter. The deep, soft substrate of old-growth forest floor, undisturbed and continuous. She was moving through the clearing when her foot found resistance. Not a root. Something harder, flatter, the resistance of stone rather than wood. She crouched and cleared the leaf matter with her hands, working outward from the point of resistance in the careful manner she had learned from handling delicate materials, not brushing, lifting layer by layer, the way you uncovered something you did not yet fully know the dimensions of. A flat stone emerged, large enough to have been placed rather than simply present the proportions of a stone, chosen for a specific purpose, the surface relatively flat, the edges roughly squared. It had been half buried by decades of leaf accumulation and soil movement, the forest floor, having worked around it and over it, incorporating it into the ground, the way forests incorporate everything that stays long enough. She cleared the upper face completely and held the lantern close. A single carved letter pressed into the stone surface with a chisel or a similar tool, the cut clean despite the years of weathering. A. Beneath it, a date, 1941. Hattie knelt beside the stone and looked at the date for a long moment. 1941. The same year as the barn. The same year as the vault. The year Agnes had built the structure that would hold everything she needed to preserve, had installed the mechanism that would protect it, and had come to this clearing in the center of the old growth stand, and had marked the stone at its heart with her initial and the year. 31 years before Vernon's lien. 31 years before the fabricated assessment and the auction that had taken the farm and the timber sale that had cleared 200 acres of the forest land she had surveyed for 27 years. She had been 33 years old when she cut her initial into this stone. She had been planning the protection of these 8 acres since she was 33 years old. Ruth came to stand beside her and looked at the stone. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The old growth stand was quiet around them, the November light coming through the canopy in the long, angled way of late-season light, the trees standing in the particular stillness of things that had been in one place for a very long time and had no reason to be elsewhere. Agnes marked those trees in 1941 and protected them for 83 years. Subscribe. The final part of her story is the one she designed from the very beginning. Ruth found the grave on a Wednesday afternoon. She had been working through the county cemetery records as part of the broader research, establishing the full biographical record of Agnes Hollis for the heritage designation documentation, which required a complete account of her life and its dates. The cemetery records had taken less time to locate than expected. Agnes had been buried in the county cemetery in 1977, the year of her death in the general section, rather than the family plot she had shared with Thomas in the years of their marriage. A single modest stone, no family markers adjacent, a plot purchased individually separate from any family arrangement. Ruth had photographed the stone and sent the image to Hattie without annotation, which told Hattie that Ruth had already read the epitaph and understood it did not require explanation. Agnes Ruth Hollis, 1908 to 1977. She knew her land. Hattie looked at the image on her phone for a long time. 4 words, the kind of epitaph that was either chosen carelessly by someone reaching for something that sounded appropriate or chosen with complete precision by someone who had thought carefully about the truest thing they knew about the person and had been willing to put it in stone. These 4 words were the second kind. She was certain of it before she knew who had written them. She called Ruth. The cemetery's records showed the plot had been purchased and the stone commissioned in 1977, the same year as Agnes's death by a single buyer with a single check. Ruth read her the name on the payment record. Gareth Hollis. He had been 27 years old. Hattie sat with the phone in her hand after the call ended and thought about a 27-year-old man going to a stonemason in 1977, 5 years after standing in the hallway while his father shut the door, in Agnes's face 2 weeks after watching her clear her last belongings from the barn in the manner of someone completing a job and commissioning a headstone for a woman who had no one else to do it and choosing for her epitaph the truest thing he knew. She knew her land. She called Gareth. He answered on the second ring. She told him she had found the grave. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The particular silence of someone receiving information they already knew and had been carrying in a specific way for a long time, now being received from a different direction. Then I thought it was the least I could do. His voice was quiet and even. I wasn't sure if she had anyone else by then. She hadn't. Ruth had confirmed this in the estate records. Agnes had outlived Thomas by 8 years, had no children, and her death in 1977 had been recorded with no next of kin listed. It was the right epitaph, Hattie said. Another silence, shorter. She told me once that she knew her land the way a librarian knows her books, Gareth said. She said, I can walk it in the dark and tell you what's there. I can close my eyes and recite every tree on the northeast parcel. He paused. I thought that was worth putting on a stone. She drove to the cemetery the following afternoon. The general section was quieter than the family plots, fewer flowers, fewer recent visits. The stones here, older on average, the ground settled around them with the patience of years. She found Agnes's plot in the 3rd row, the stone modest in size and clean, the 4 words legible across the distance of a few feet. She set the wooden tree carving at the base of the stone. The first object she had found, the first signature, the first AH, placed at the base of the last marker. The carving had been on the kitchen windowsill when Agnes left the farm. She understood now. Not forgotten. Left for the next person. The first thing a careful person would find on first walking through the kitchen. The first indication that the hands that had made this place had cared about what they made. She had brought Agnes's final survey map, the last document completed before the vault was sealed, the one with the red border and the November 1972 notation. She unfolded it carefully and looked at it in the gray afternoon light. Agnes had named everything. She had given names to the ridgelines, the names recorded in the survey's legend in her precise hand, and to the creek crossings and the clearings and the seasonal paths between sections. Margaret's Run for the creek on the northern boundary, named for her mother in the summer of 1945. The hollow for the low section where the mist collected on cold mornings. The long ridge for the elevated spine of the eastern boundary. The stand for the 8-acre old-growth parcel at the northern edge, simply the stand, because it needed no further description. She read the names aloud. Not all of them there were too many accumulated across 27 years of walking the same land in different seasons, the names building into a complete private geography of a place Agnes had known more thoroughly than anyone else ever had or would. But she read the names from the final map, the ones Agnes had included in the last survey she completed before she sealed the door. Margaret's Run, the hollow, the long ridge, the stand. She read them at the pace Agnes had written them, each one deliberate, each one carrying the weight of the thing it named. "You surveyed 200 acres of trees," she said to the stone, "and you mapped every inch of the ground beneath them. You registered what needed protecting under a filing category the man who would take your farm had never thought to look at. You built a vault in 1941 because you understood that foresight is the only kind of protection that survives, and you were right for 83 years. She sat beside the stone until the afternoon light began to flatten and the temperature started its early evening drop. Walking back toward the cemetery gate, she passed the County Historical Society's notice board, a corkboard mounted at the entrance, the standard notices of a local organization maintaining its communications with its community. Most of the notices were routine. One was not. Heritage Designation Nominations, Open Farmsteads 1900 to 1950. Deadline December 15th. She took out her phone and photographed it. She drove back to the farm in the early dark and parked at the lane and sat for a moment with the engine off. The barn was visible from where she sat, the structure Agnes had built in 1941 and signed at the peak of the ridge beam and sealed in November 1972 and left for whoever would come. The vault door was open. She had left it that way since the afternoon she had turned the combination and felt the mechanism release, had made no decision to leave it. Open had simply not closed it, because closing it had not felt like the right thing to do. A rectangle of amber light in the barn's shadow, warm against the November dark. The opening Agnes had built 83 years ago, open for the first time in 52 years. Agnes marked those trees in 1941 and protected them for 83 years. Subscribe, the final part of her story, is the one she designed from the very beginning. The county court hearing room was on the second floor of the municipal building. A small room, the kind used for administrative proceedings rather than contested litigation. A judge's table at the front, 4 chairs arranged in a row, facing it, the windows looking out over the county square, where the November morning was going, about its ordinary business without knowledge of what was happening on the second floor. Hattie sat on the first chair, Ruth beside her, Gareth beside Ruth. His hands folded in his lap with the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting for a specific moment for a very long time and had arrived at it and was being careful not to disturb it. The county solicitor at the end of the row with her files. The judge had reviewed the petition materials in advance. Hattie had submitted everything Agnes had organized, the annotated assessment, the 36 payment receipts in their cedar box. The mineral rights deed, the survey maps, the vault documentation, Agnes's 1974 letter to Gareth Cecil's Vernon's employment record, the county's own paid and full receipts alongside the fabricated lien. Everything Agnes had numbered and wrapped in oilcloth and placed on a wooden tray in a cedar-lined vault in a barn she had built herself in 1941. The judge set the fabricated tax assessment on the table in front of him. He looked at it for a moment without speaking at Vernon's certified signature, and at Agnes's pencil annotations beside every figure the cross-references in her precise hand, the county record numbers she had placed beside each entry, so that anyone who checked would find exactly what she had found. "This is a remarkable document," he said. His voice was measured the tone of a person who had spent a career reading legal materials and had developed the professional composure required to deliver findings without editorializing, both in what it falsely claims and in the precision with which it has been refuted. He looked up from the document. "The petition is granted." The legal transfer took the form of a county court order. The 8-acre mineral parcel transferred from the estate of Agnes R. Hollis to the County Land Trust, the transfer documented in the County Land Registry, with full notation of its provenance and the circumstances that had kept it in Agnes's name for 76 years. The designation attached to the transfer was read into the record by the solicitor in the formal language of county heritage proceedings. The Agnes Hollis Natural Preserve. Ruth had told her the previous week that it would be the first heritage land designation in the county's history named for a woman. She had said it in the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting a fact that was both straightforwardly true and straightforwardly wrong to be true, and had not elaborated further because the fact elaborated itself. The fabricated tax assessment of 1972 was entered into the county's historical record as a formally documented instance of official misconduct by a county employee. The language was precise and permanent. Vernon Hollis County Tax Assessor, 1965 to 1976, had fabricated a tax liability against Agnes R. Hollis of the Hollis Farm parcel in fiscal years 1969 through 1971 against taxes that had been paid in full and receipted by the county's own tax clerk. The record would carry this notation indefinitely. After the hearing in the corridor outside the room, Hattie drove to the State Agricultural Heritage Archive with Ruth and 30 rolled survey maps in the back of the car. The acquisitions archivist was a woman of 50 who had spent her career handling the documentary record of agricultural practice across 3 centuries of the state's history, and she unrolled Agnes's 1945 map on the examination table with the careful attention of someone who already understood from the weight and condition of the roll that it was going to require her full consideration. She read the annotations. She looked at the plotting of the trees, the species, the diameters, the ages estimated from growth rings, where Agnes had noted felled samples in the survey area. She traced the creek line with one finger and read the name Agnes had written in the legend. She did not look up for a long time. "This is the work of a trained survey professional," she said finally, not to Hattie specifically, to the map, or to the room, the observation of someone who had just encountered something that exceeded the category she had prepared for it. "She was self-taught," Hattie said. The archivist looked up. She looked at Hattie for a moment and then back at the map, and then at the 30 rolls standing in their carrying case beside the table, and the expression on her face was the expression of someone recalibrating their understanding of a thing they had thought they already understood. The County Historical Society accepted the Hollis Farm for heritage designation the following week. The formal citation read, "Hollis Farm established 1939, significant for independent agricultural survey methodology and structural self-build construction." The barn, Agnes's barn, the one she had built in 1941 and signed at the peak of the ridge beam, was specifically noted as an example of self-directed timber construction of exceptional quality. Gareth had been present throughout all of it. He had sat in the court hearing and the subsequent administrative proceedings with the quiet consistency of someone fulfilling a commitment that had been made a long time ago and was only now being completed. He had not spoken during the hearing except once when the judge asked the standard procedural question of whether anyone present had anything to add to the record before the findings were concluded. Gareth said, "My father used his position as county tax assessor to take something that was not his. He spent the remainder of his life at a comfortable distance from that fact. I wanted in the record that Agnes Hollis came to our door with every payment receipt she had ever received from the county, organized and cross-referenced, and my father did not open the folder. The judge looked at him for a moment. "It will be in the record," he said. "And it was—" That evening, Hattie went back to the barn. The survey cabinet was empty. The maps at the archive, the cedar box, and the annotated assessment and the deed in the county's care, the 1974 letter held by Gareth at his own request, returned to the metal box on his mantelpiece where he had kept it for 50 years. The carved panel still hung on the barn wall where she had mounted it the week after opening the vault, the wall where the survey cabinet had stood where Agnes had stored 30 years of maps in flat document slots and had come and gone through the decades without anyone understanding what the cabinet contained. He took the trees. He missed the ground beneath them. A.H. November 14th, 1972. The vault door was open. She had never closed it, had made no decision about it, had simply left it, as Agnes had left things in the condition appropriate to what they were. A vault that had been built to hold something, and had held it for 52 years, and had released it to the right hands was a vault that should stand open. Its purpose was completed. There was nothing further to protect. She stepped into the vault. The cedar lining was unchanged, the smell still present, the preservation still complete the interior, exactly as Agnes had built it in 1941. The wooden tray was gone, its contents transferred to their proper archival homes. The shelf was empty. She took the wooden tree carving from her coat pocket. She had carried it since the first day had carried it through the county records office and the barn and Gareth's kitchen and the cemetery and the old growth stand and the court hearing the way you carry a thing that has not yet arrived at the place it belongs. In her pocket through every step of this, the first signature, the first A.H., the object Agnes had left on the kitchen windowsill of the farmhouse she had built and lost, and left evidence of in a barn vault for a stranger she would never meet. She set it on the center shelf, the shelf Agnes had built the wooden tray to sit on, the shelf where the 4 numbered packages had rested for 52 years, the carved tree with its explicit roots, functional, not ornamental, the work of someone who thought about roots as structural reality, placed on the empty shelf in the cedar-lined vault in the stone foundation of the barn Agnes had signed at the Ridgebeam in 1941. It had always been part of the vault's contents. Agnes had just not known which stranger would carry it back. She stepped out of the vault and stood in the barn in the amber dusk light. In the distance beyond the northern boundary of the farm, the old growth stand was still and dark against the last of the November sky. 8 acres Agnes had marked in 1941 and surveyed in 1945 and registered in 1948 and protected through 31 years of the threat she had anticipated and 11 years of the betrayal she had prepared for and 47 years of the legal limbo she had arranged so that the right person could resolve it. Agnes's trees. Still there! She did not close the barn door. Agnes Hollis built that vault in 1941 and sealed it in 1972 and stamped the amount of the crime on the door so that whoever came next would know within 2 days of arriving exactly what they were standing in front of. She spent 30 years mapping land she knew might be taken from her registered what mattered under a filing category. Her thief would never think to look at, and trusted completely without evidence across 52 years that someone would pay $330 for the right to finish what she had started. I think she got exactly the return she was expecting. Agnes built her vault the same year she built her barn, 31 years before anyone tried to take either from her. Subscribe, and tell me what's the most precise thing anyone has ever done to protect something they loved.